Preparing the live stream. I guess I should record too. Okay. Let's switch accounts here. Okay. And now, no thanks. Close. All right, so I'm just going to post this link. And after that...
But you can't stream live from Gilded Age? I can.
You can. Okay, no. I am not...
Okay, yeah, I thought I set this shit up.
I did not even bother to check.
Yeah, see, it's telling me like create a title and to start the stream, but I don't really know how this works other than that. So I don't want to do it.
We'll do it when it's just us, and we'll figure that out.
Okay. Well, I'm just gonna cancel this.
Yeah, just do that, and as soon as Assemblyman Kim gets here, we will be good to go.
I'm here.
Oh, hey. You're here. Sorry, I'm looking everywhere else and not there. I confess, I'm a big fan of yours, and I told my father that I'd be interviewing you, and he demanded that I send him a link. So
awesome.
I am just gonna do that, and then we'll get right into the questioning, and we'll give you the third degree.
All right, sounds good. Hey, Mark.
Hey, Ron.
Good to see you.
Hey, it's great to see you.
Please call me Ron.
I just read a story about you tackling a would-be robber in Queens.
Yeah, no, that was like 4 years ago. Yeah, that was like my Cory Booker moment.
Yeah,
like 5 years ago. But most people actually didn't write the follow-up story. We actually tracked the person who attacked the woman, and he had like mental illness, and he had like an addiction problem, and he got arrested like 14 times in 1 year.
Oh my God.
And it just kept going through the system. So we actually got intervened, and had the Mayor de Blasio, to his credit, his office was good, and he sent his wife who was doing the mental health stuff, and we actually were able to interject in the courts and try to get him out of the system and give him some wraparound service. But no one cares about that. Everyone cares about the tackle. Yeah.
Well, no, it resonated with me because it's become with defund the police and fund people that are better equipped to deal with mental illness. It seemed it was striking that you had that conversation 4 years ago and made a point to say, make sure this guy's dealt with in a way that will help him and not just punish him.
Right.
So let's get down to business here. Thank you very much, Assemblyman, for joining us. It's a great privilege to have you here, especially in the midst of everything that's going on in New York. And I know that it's a crazy time for everybody, probably crazier for you, being on the inside and having to work in this mess. So the first question I want to ask you is about this new surge of COVID cases in New York. Governor Cuomo continues to blame the second wave on individuals not social distancing and wearing masks. He's closed indoor dining in New York City, but he wants to keep businesses and schools open. The science isn't exactly on his side. We do know that transmission does happen in schools, even if it's not the primary means for transmission. We know that COVID patients are twice as likely to be office workers than remote workers, according to the CDC. And the New York Times just did a piece about how most New Yorkers are, in fact, wearing masks. So do you think that this second wave in New York is more a failure of personal responsibility, or do you think that there's a failure of policy going on with Cuomo pushing to reopen the state?
I absolutely think it's a failure of policy, and it's a failure of public sector investment. And to your surprise, like I kind of feel bad for the guy. I feel bad for Governor Andrew Cuomo because he's a walking paradox, right? Like I think there's a side to him. He wakes up, he really wants to get stuff done, and he just wants to do it. Like have people do A, B, and C, and like fix this problem already. But guess what? Like you've defunded all the hospitals, Medicaid, and really stripped away the public resource necessary to actually execute on your will. And I think that's the paradox of Andrew Cuomo, that he's got this, let's do it, like a doer attitude persona, yet he doesn't have the goods because he himself oversaw a government austerity government for years leading up to this moment.
So let's talk a little bit about his strategy to deal with this crisis. Then, so as you know, his new plan bases zone designations, zones being the area maps of the state, zone designations and closures on hospital capacity. And the old metric for determining what was a red zone, which is the most severe, and what was an orange zone and what was a yellow zone, the old metric was cases per 100,000 people and positivity rate. And in addition to this new metric, he's also ordered the expansion of hospital capacity by 25%. Under the old metric, most of the state would probably be shut down right now. As the New York Times pointed out after we did at the Daily Poster, the new strategy staves off closures. And it's really an effort to stave off closure. But even so, hospitals are quickly reaching capacity. When my article went live last Friday, 19% of New York City hospital beds were available. New data from the Department of Health and Human Services shows that at the Mount Sinai Hospital System, 92% of ICU beds were occupied last week. 91% at New York Presbyterian Hospital System were also filled. So let me ask you, do you think that New York State should be open right now? And if not, what can New York do to sustain a shutdown, given our $15 billion, I think, budget hole?
I think first and foremost, when he structured his advisory group and his economic team, you shouldn't have put an executive from Blackstone to oversee our economic recovery. That was his first mistake. The second mistake is he didn't talk to the people who were most impacted. To this day, he has not waited in the line of a food pantry line, talked to a nursing home resident, or visited a nurse and had spent time with them one-on-one, because they actually hold all the solutions. If you spend time on the ground, you know what people want. A small business owner, there's nothing more that a small business owner want than be paid to stay home. Knowing that, the rent's taken care of and they could stay home and take care of their families and kids, but they can't. They completely lost faith and trust in the government. Like, how can, after the first wave, fine, like, we don't know what we're doing, we're going to stay home, we're going to shut it down, but they have not received a dime of support, especially if you're a smaller size, if you're a mom and pop, if you're an immigrant. They haven't received a dime from anywhere, and you're telling them you got to shut down again. I think the right thing, we have plenty of time. The right thing that we should have done was to fund people and pay people to stay home and take care of each other. That would have resolved everything. And the irony is, we do have billions of dollars of reserves. We do have a natural catastrophe fund that we can liquidate now. We could leverage certain things to borrow a low interest to make sure that people are staying home and they're paid to do so. But this governor, is listening to a team of people that is prioritizing markets and economies over people's lives. I mean, that's the common theme throughout this entire 9 months of COVID.
So let me just follow that up and ask, even if Cuomo doesn't want to close down the entire state, even if he doesn't want to do that, he still has options that are not being discussed right now. One of those would be mandating remote work where possible. That I haven't heard anybody really talk about that. And a lot of the people I talked to for my story think that's a good idea, including one doctor who works in an ICU and was saying, you know, we got this shit under control back in the spring, and now it's blowing up again, and nobody seems to care. And said it felt pretty insulting. So, I mean, do you think that would be at least a temporary solution? And why is no one talking about it?
Yeah, I don't know. Same thing with public schools, like remote learning and all. I mean, why risk it? Like, if we can have the means to keep people at home, again, like, pay people to stay home. It's a simple solution, but I think they're just afraid. They're afraid of the corporate interests, the businesses, of the long-term impact of private equity firms and investors that are hedging their bets on the outcome of this pandemic. Like, without an economy, there's no extraction of money and wealth that these people are betting on. And I think there's a larger goal here, which is to prioritize steady economic activity over the safety of people and their lives. And I think these decisions that were made, some of the worst decisions, like giving out a blanket, and you cover this extensively, a blanket corporate immunity to nursing home executives and hospitals at the peak of the pandemic, should be a crime against humanity. I mean, that's as simple as that. Now they're using the same language at the federal level to give a blanket corporate immunity for corporations. Just think about a society that has come to a point in the middle of a pandemic. They're more worried about saving the bottom line of corporations than people's lives.
Well, that's something we've talked about pretty extensively on this podcast, and especially in our last few episodes. It's incredibly frustrating because it seems like the kind of assistance that people need isn't even being talked about. It's not even on the table.
I mean, yeah, it seems like what is the obvious and the right thing is pretty clear, and we just can't muster the will to do it. I mean, in a similar vein, sadly, I think that we're going to see an explosion of homelessness, right? If Congress doesn't act, and if we don't start getting money in people's pockets. Now, there are some New York State senators that are pushing for a blanket eviction moratorium, but Cuomo prefers extending the protections of the Tenant Safe Harbor Act, which will allow property owners to seek these monetary judgments instead of outright evicting people. I think he's extended it now through January for commercial eviction cases. I mean, what do you think of his priorities there, and what do you think the right thing is to do?
Yeah, his priority is very clear. He wants the markets, whether it be the housing market, the hospital market, or the regular business market, to be a priority over the safety of our people. It doesn't matter what sector you're looking at, including inmates that are stuck in prisons. Other, even moderate governors have gone out of their way to make sure that people are protected. But this governor has not exhibited any kind of empathy toward people who are most vulnerable and who have underlying conditions. And going back to your housing question, all the studies have shown that evictions lead to widespread of COVID. I mean, it's just like, it's ridiculous. But the fact that they're stuck on, oh, what's going to happen to the real estate market? What if this person doesn't pay the mortgage? Then there's no property tax. There's no this. Again, people are dying, and they're worried about market fundamentalism in this context. And that's at the core of the philosophical divide in this state. And unless we're honest about that, and how we got here, and why is he so popular? Like, why is he still, polling at 70%? It's mind-boggling. And I wake up always thinking about, like, how do we get to this point in society when people are okay with having an authoritative governor like Andrew Cuomo prioritizing corporations and markets over people's lives in the middle of a pandemic?
Yeah, it is so frustrating, and it was frustrating and kind of surreal to see during the height of this, and I guess the end of March, early April, where Cuomo would march out on TV. This was about the time that the hospital ship was, maneuvering its way into New York Harbor, and people who probably even honestly had barely heard the name Cuomo, except if they were driving over a bridge, maybe, when all of a sudden infatuated with him. And some of the best analysis I saw about this was, he has a severe authoritarian streak, and people with that streak thrive during crises. But now that we're in this position where, it's still an emergency, but it's not as acute an emergency, and we need to actually take steps to do the right thing and help people. It seems like he just flubs it at every opportunity.
And sort of to that point, I mean, Assemblyman Kim, you have been a longtime proponent of raising taxes on the wealthy, and Cuomo has been a longtime opponent of that. And I believe yesterday you were discussing a plan to raise taxes on the wealthiest to pay for services for just regular people in New York. And today Cuomo addressed that plan and said that if we're going to raise taxes on the wealthy, it has to be paired with cuts, and we have to address all of the budget right now. If you want to raise taxes on the wealthy, we're going to have to do all of the budget now, and that's before a Biden administration comes in and maybe gets more help to the states. I mean, does that make sense to you?
It is completely illogical what the governor, I mean, it makes sense to the billionaire class. I mean, if I were living in the Hamptons and the governor is putting out the message, I would be so happy that I have a governor that's willing to shill for me every single minute to make sure that my property, my wealth is, no one can touch it, and that's what this is really is about. I mean, and to be fair, it's not just him. It was the previous governors, the previous Republicans and Democrats for 30 years have normalized this type of practice, where we have a regressive tax system. We are completely afraid to touch real wealth. And whenever the federal government or state, they come in and give out corporate giveaways or reduce taxes on the wealth, no one blinks an eye. Everyone's like, oh, that makes sense, because they're saying they're going to create jobs. They're going to create all this revenue. Jobs and revenue are the biggest sham words in neoliberal corporate agenda for the last 40 years. Because all the data have shown that all their reduction in wealth, it went straight to the pockets of the ultra rich. It hasn't created any of the jobs and revenue that we desperately needed. We know what did when we actually had a progressive tax system. That's when our middle class grew the most, and we had real upward and social mobility. And now, New York is still the wealthiest place, in the country, in the world, the 10th richest state compared to other nations, been richer than Finland, wealthier than Russia, than South Korea, my hometown, my homeland. But we also have the worst wealth divide, economic divide, and the worst social and upward mobility. So that is really my driving purpose why I want to tax the rich. That we need to deconcentrate. We need to break the concentration of wealth to give working families, immigrants, and next generation a shot at the so-called dream, the American dream, and the promise that ambition and hard work will finally beat birthright in this state and this country again. And New York has to lead that, not Washington, New York, because we hold the key to change that narrative.
I have to say that is a very welcome message for me to hear, because I grew up on the East End of Long Island, and I am very, Cuomo says, oh, if we raise taxes on the wealthy, they'll just flee the state. And having grown up in the Hamptons, that is not happening. They're never going to surrender their little enclaves. And so it is really rather galling to have a governor come out and say, and just put forward an obviously wrong-headed argument about why we can't do something that is so basic. And just to put out a statistic, Mark and I did a report on homelessness back in I think it was 2018 now, beginning of 2018. 2018, yeah. And at the time, there were about 87,000 empty apartments in New York City, and that dwarfs the homeless population in the city. Like
They call them ghost apartments. That was when I became familiar with that term.
Yeah.
And that number has only increased since the pandemic, because they all fled the city.
Yeah.
And so there's all this glamour and money and these luxury apartments, and they're unoccupied, and people are sleeping on the streets.
Almost 100,000 empty apartments, and 6,000 people are sleeping on the street every night. I mean, it's...
Yeah, not only that, during this pandemic, they facilitated rezonings that allow to us to build more luxury apartments that are going to be empty, and more hotels. This happened just down the block from where I live, 3 million square feet in Flushing rezoning. People fought it for weeks, but the city council had virtual meetings, and they passed with all the votes. So
they're doing it here. There's a building right next to in where I'm in Brooklyn. We've got a building going up right now across the street.
Yeah.
I mean, is it tax base and just the influence that, you know, these and the sway that these people, wealthy developers, et cetera, hold, and the fact that interest rates have been at zero for almost 12 years now, or is there a more noble sort of operating system that is guiding these policies?
Well, for the rezoning and the developments?
For the rezoning and developments, yeah. Do they think this will actually make people's lives better? Is it just...
Yeah, I mean, there was a Real Deal magazine article that featured my opposition, because I wrote an op-ed about this, about wealth inequality in Asian American communities. And you walk in a district like mine, where people celebrate the condos, but we also have the worst poverty. In fact, the worst divide in all minority groups exists in Asian Americans. And the Real Deal editor wrote a big piece saying, Ron, Kim has it wrong. It's not the developers that cause wealth inequality. It's just this is a byproduct of wealth inequality. But that really brings to a deeper question that actually intersects with not only development, but also the Green New Deal and the green economy, which is, if you are in the business of supplying the demand of the ultra rich that are causing unnecessary carbon footprints on this planet, because there's no better example than empty luxury apartments than unnecessary carbon emissions that's destroying. In fact, there was an investigative report that came out in New York and other places that the majority of the carbon emissions are caused by the wealthiest populations in our communities. So do we then, as lawmakers, have a duty to curtail the supply and manage the decline toward a Green New Deal in terms of the markets? I think that is the core of the Green New Deal in a place like New York City, of how we can shift that conversation, that we're not here to facilitate the demands of the ultra rich when they're destroying our communities, our people, and planet. Like, we need to come in and say, stop, this is not going to happen. We're going to deconcentrate, and we're going to shift policies toward community land trust and other real, sustainable models toward living.
Well, Mark and I just did an article on the Shinnecock that I think you shared, and one of the things that ended up, I don't think it ended up in the final article, but one of the things that we talked about with tribal members was that these big luxury mansions in Southampton are huge problems in terms of like septic and water pollution, environmental pollution, and that all this development is really driving contributing to the climate crisis, and it's really abysmal. So how do we stop this development? Because on the one hand, and I don't want to name the person who made this argument, but they are somebody who is ostensibly on the left was saying like, oh well, you can't every time there's affordable housing, you get these NIMBY arguments like, oh, we can't build that because of X, Y, or Z, and like you really have to change You have to change zoning, and you have to sort of unleash development, and that's really how you become an ally.
No, I don't
And
think.
I don't buy that. So what do we
Yeah.
do then?
Yeah, I mean, I don't. It's like the fake Green Deal. Like, oh, we need to marketize, renewable energy and give the markets to readjust. Like, we don't have time to readjust. We need public control, and that's the ultimate, I think, solution. We need to be brave enough to say we need public control of our economy. And I'm not saying don't let small businesses and the private sector thrive. But there was a time when we were able to invest toward a direction of how we want to take our city and our country, and move the supply and demand toward there. Supply and demand will not move toward our people or a greener planet if the public sector do not interject ourselves and make it so. And obviously the private sector has a lot of money that and align with corporate media and the pop culture to demonize and vilify politicians and public sectors that even talk about anything like this. Oh, they're a bunch of communists and socialists, at best populists, or career politicians. But that no longer resonates. I think the people, when you look at the policies of what the people want, they want Medicare for all. They want public control policies because they recognize that the private extractive models are not serving them.
Couldn't agree more. So perhaps just to bring it back to COVID quickly. So you endorsed Bernie in 2020, and he's been fighting for relief checks in this next COVID deal. But from what we're hearing, it seems like state and local aid is really going to be a casualty here. So, and without that, states like New York, they're going to have to make some really, really difficult decisions. And it seems patently obvious by now, right, that the safest path to deal with COVID is a national shutdown, where the federal government keeps people whole and keeps these businesses afloat, small businesses afloat, and cancels and forgives rents and mortgages so that people don't actively have to go out there and spread this thing. But instead, it just seems like we just keep punting. The federal government has kept punting until there's a vaccine, and just trying to manage business as close to usual as possible without actually providing any meaningful aid to people. So is this frustrating to you? And what things do you think are not on the table that really need to be on the table for us to handle this, have handled this better and handle it better going forward, so that less people have to die ultimately? Because that's really what's at stake, and it's so easy to forget that.
Yeah, and obviously it's extremely frustrating, and the reason why I was the first New York public official, but this time around to endorse Bernie, is not only his platform on social justice, but he was the one that clearly fought for economic rights, as a fundamental right for all people. And if he had leadership like that, we wouldn't be having this type of a discussion. I think we would have already stepped in, funded everyone to stay home, and been on a better road to recovery. Not only a better road to recovery, but just transforming our economy toward a 100% green new economy. We would have already seized this opportunity to do that. But right now, we are at a K recovery where the rich are not just recovering, they're thriving and they're making more money off this crisis. And the poor and small businesses and the workers are literally going to die. I mean, they're going to be homeless. And I've had people waiting on my food pantry line, a person who died of hunger 2 weeks ago, waiting on a food pantry line. So this isn't something that we're just, making up. Like this shit is happening now. Like people are dying of hunger in the richest
in the United
city.
States of America. In the richest place in the richest country in the world. Jeez.
Yeah.
It's
and
astounding.
Again, at the beginning of this section, Like, how do people become so desensitized to something like that? Like, how can we listen? How can we hear that story and become so desensitized where we can be dehumanizing our fellow neighbors and our human beings, and we can just walk away and go eat brunch or dinner or whatever, and because that's what's happening. Because if otherwise, everyone will be out there protesting. Everyone will shut it down. Like, this is not going to happen. Like, we are going to take over City Hall, Albany, and DC. This is not the direction that we want this country to go. So that's I think where we are right now. And if Cuomo, and I feel just like Andrew Cuomo, man, like he just, I root for him. Like, I want him to be a hero. I want him to be a better version of FDR, because FDR wasn't that inclusive in his New Deal. But imagine that we have a better New Deal under this time. Like, and I'll be the first one to be endorsing him for whatever the hell he wants to run, And I think, but the fact that he's so good at auditioning to manage inequality while telling a good story for the people to stay on the treadmill, that you are going to be New York tough, that this is about your individual grit and determination, and this is what we're made of. That's just dangerous, in my opinion.
No, it's welfare state for the wealthiest, and just rugged Darwinist capitalism for everybody else.
So we do have a question here in our chat that I want to ask you. Would love to hear Assemblyman Kim's comment on the debt collective, student debt strike, and debt cancellation in general.
Yeah, thank you. We launched a student debt cancellation campaign 2 years ago in City Hall, and obviously, following that, Bernie, Liz Warren took a 90% approach, and the advocates that have been working on this issue for 10 years took it to a national level overnight. So now even Joe Biden, even Chuck Schumer is tweeting out cancel student debt. So it's amazing in 2 years that we reached this point. And it says a lot about what it means to cancel debt, because back then when we launched this campaign, there were so many trolls and people just attacking me, like, I pay my debt. Like, how could you possibly, you if you borrow something, you got to pay back. But we were able to, especially the advocates, to walk people back from those opinions and get to a point where this is actually, in New York, a very popular platform. I recently saw a state poll where above 68% of New Yorkers want to cancel student debt, and that is amazing. So I think people understand. It's amazing to me because people understand that debt-driven money is no longer works, especially private debt. And now we have a duty to also educate the difference between private money and public money, and that's a harder discussion because people don't understand that we do have the power of the purse in Washington, D.C., because when we fund the police, when we fund the military, no one questions how that money is being produced. That's public money that's being produced by a keystroke. But when we want to fund the Green New Deal, Medicare for all, anything that involves the people, it is the national debt. There is a deficit. We can't do this. We can't do that. Because the people who have control of private money are at the very top. And as long as we don't print money for the bottom, their money becomes valuable. Their money gets leveraged into loans, into credit cards, into payday lending, into all sorts of leveraged money that comes down to our poor community in the form of credit. And credit is not real money. We need money, real spendable cash to come back to our communities.
Yeah, it does seem like the model today, the business model is hook people into debt and just extract from them for as long as possible, and which really is like a weight on on that individual for the extent of time that they are in debt, which for most people is, I guess, most of their lives.
Every level, even the city of New York, people don't understand. We pay $3.1 billion, over $3 billion of interest to money that we borrow from Wall Street every single year during this pandemic. That money can go to hospitals, schools, etc. But we're paying off interest, and that's the con of debt, interest-bearing loans and debt. That it's highly exploitative and it's highly extractive. It doesn't matter where it comes from. When you hear the word interest, when you hear the loans, it's not good.
And I mean, the other side of it is it keeps workers imperiled, and what should be what is the most decisive parts of the career is as far as the trajectory of the rest of their lives is going to go.
Mark is about to tell you his favorite quote from the 90s.
I'm not going to quote Larry Summers right now. Although, wait, no, that was not Larry Summers. That was Greenspan. Greenspan said, we owe a lot of the success of the economy to basically making workers more precarious and desperate. But I mean, and part of that is student loan debt. If you come out of law school with $200,000 in debt, and you want to improve the world, right? You're not going to take that nonprofit job or that environmental law job. You're going to take it's going to be a lot more tempting to take that corporate gig when you have $200,000 to pay off, and then it just brings more people into this.
Yeah. No, I had a lunch, and I mentioned this in an op-ed I wrote about student debt in Daily News a few years ago. I had lunch one day with the pretty well-off executive, private equity CEO, and he was like an intergenerational money. Like he inherited a lot of that money from his father. And we're talking about student debt. I just trying to make an economic argument, to this Harvard, educated and executive. And he turned around and said, Ron, what do you think is the biggest motivator of people? And he said, it's fear. And that's what debt does to people.
Absolutely.
That fear makes you want to work. Fear makes you want to go to work, wake up in the morning. The fear that you're going to lose your family, the fear that you're going to lose your home. That's what drives people every day. And that just blew my mind away. Like that's how intergenerational elites think of how our economy works.
It's enslavement in a really real way. I mean, wage to slavery, but if you're carrying $200,000 in debt, what are your options? I mean, it's life obliterating in really real ways if you can't pay that off. So
well, I think your point about fear also is really important one, especially now when everybody is stressed financially and whatnot. I mean, there's not only does it prevent people from making positive change, but it drives them to sort of to the opposite, to negative. In New York City alone, we're seeing an uptick in violence right now, shootings and murders. This is no coincidence since the start of the pandemic. I mean, that is the trajectory, at least I think, that we are on. If we do not address the massive need that is out there, and unless we alleviate that insecurity and that fear, like we will be driving people into violent thought processes and action.
Yeah. It's not a coincidence that as wealth inequality, the gap has increased in the city of New York. Our police budget has also increased at the same rate. In the last 10 years, our NYPD's budget increased by 50% or 60%. It doesn't mean the population increased by 50%, but what it did, it's the economic divide and the concentration of wealth. How do you enforce that fear? How do you make sure people understand the law exists to sanction state-backed violence on the poor? Right? And that's what the enforcement agencies do to our most vulnerable members, especially racial violence, because people who are in debt or mostly Black and brown people who have to take out more money to go to college and who are more likely to default on their loans after college because the opportunities do not exist for them to pay back that debt.
Yeah, I mean, you see this in systems of apartheid and segregation in the US. The more unequal a society, the more resources and energy it takes to keep it, the more inherently unstable it is. And so the more energy it takes to keep it stable and protect the interests of, in this case, the top. And then that manifests itself in 50% increased police budget to
which then
maintain
feeds
order.
the inequality.
Yeah.
It's a cycle. It's a brutal cycle. Let's talk about corruption in New York. New York is one of, if not the most corrupt. I think there was an article recently. It's the most corrupt state in the country. Cuomo shut down a probe when it almost reached his office. I think people who worked like on the other side of the door were pinged in this corruption probe. What do you make of it, and what can we do to crack down on corruption in government?
Well, I think public finance at statewide level and getting money out of the deep layers of politics is the first step. It's clear why we had a corporate immunity legislation in the middle of a pandemic. It wasn't, none of the families wanted that. The residents who were dying in nursing homes weren't requesting a corporate immunity for the nursing homes. It was like the biggest donors. I mean, they kept a list of people and of what this industries wanted when they're drafting this legislation. I actually saw a leaked memo, one pager, of what the top industries wanted out of this bill. It was sickening. And so getting money out of politics is number one. I think secondly, just like how I'm going to be pushing a inheritance tax. I also believe in the same philosophical alignment that we shouldn't have career politicians. Like, we shouldn't have people been in office, the same position for 8, 12, or beyond like a certain time period. I think term limits is important, and it pushes people to focus on the job at hand and not be afraid and not worry about legacies and figuring out how to just win re-elections. So I think that should be a critical step to root out the corruption. But I think the law is pretty clear. I think people know what's corrupt and what's not corrupt, what's legal and what's not illegal, and what's ethical and what's not unethical. I think just like the police, there could be a cultural element to it, that's driven by mostly male-driven political and social currencies that enforces people to act in a certain way, right? You have to be a team player. You have to be loyal to this. Like those type of, I think, gender languages that we use in politics does have a tremendous impact in building the foundation around corruption, because we fall in line. And I'm reflecting on this because I've seen it. I was part of, that's how I got into politics. I played that game. I carried those petitions for the establishment, and was told, it's not your turn yet. Well, you be a good team player, son, and then you do A, B, and C, and we'll look after you. So I know how that game goes. But that also allows people like Cuomo to be at the top, right? The authoritative figure, because people have to support that authoritarianism, and there has to be a machine and a structure foundation to support people like him.
And then there are no checks. I mean, just recently, Lindsey Boylan, who we had on our podcast, accused Cuomo of sexual harassment for years. And this kind of behavior just exists when there are no checks on people at the top, and it goes unnoticed or unreported or whatever, and it's rather troubling. So, yeah, I mean, this culture of sort of patronage that you're describing, it doesn't just stop at the state. It doesn't just end at the state level. Like, we see it at the national level too. I mean, not to hit our favorite target, but America's mayor being appointed to the head of a federal agency with no real experience to run it. I mean, that is clearly a patronage
Buttigieg is
decision.
an expert on trains and busing.
Because he played that game, right? When somebody tweeted out, like, interesting point, Pete actually loves this game where you buy up like trains and whatnot. And like, what? It's embarrassing for everyone involved, but I would be really embarrassed if I were in that position and like they had to justify my appointment by like, well, he does play a game that involves trains. Like, well, he plays Sim City. He's clearly qualified to run a city.
Yeah. No, I mean, you know what? Like he worked at McKinsey, so he must know how to privatize every public transit system in the city of New York. And I'm sure he'll in 4 years we're going to see him working for Uber or something. And
public-private partnerships. That's the key. That's the key. So definitely, I definitely hear your point that these cultures exist, and it is, publicly financed elections is great. The outside spending is what concerns me. I think in terms of campaign finance, because we can limit how much a politician can take from some individual. We can limit how much a corporation is able to spend on a campaign. Well, we can't anymore after Citizens United, but outside spending, like issue advocacy and that sort of thing, that's unrestricted. And until there is a change of that Supreme Court precedent that was set in 1976, we're really powerless to address that.
Yeah, but look at how Bernie did it, right? And how he fundraises and how he has an army of tens and hundreds of millions of people who are willing to fund this campaign, a truly people-powered campaign. And I actually Bernie came and supported my re-election at a time where I felt very defeated, early this year. I just, in terms of my political identity, I feel like, I don't really, the left doesn't really want me either. Like, as an Asian American man, like, I don't understand. Like, I had this like existential like political crisis, and Bernie came in and it was like, he not only endorsed, but he sent out like a tweet and an email, and overnight, like I got like 5,000 or 6,000 donors within hours of like one small email that, can you support my friend Ron? And I'm like, and that's when I realized this is it. Like this is how you do it.
Well, that's the counter that we have is just people power. But ultimately, like this precedent is still damaging, and like maybe in a race that gets national attention, it works. But like I would be willing to wager that like maybe 7 out of 10 times in races that don't get national attention, the money does ultimately prove decisive. Or at least more than half.
Yeah, but also that's why I have a deep appreciation of DSA in New York City and my local chapter in Queens and how they organize. They're able to show that they can beat big money by just organizing, especially the local races. You don't need that much money. And they won all the state races. Now they're doing city council races. And the next couple of years, if they can win all those seats little by little, it's a grassroots transformation of municipal power. Because ultimately, what do we need to do as a city? We need to take over public utilities. We need to figure out how to create a public bank. That requires the city council, Albany, state assembly members and senators. And that's what they're doing without big money. So that's very exciting for me.
Well, that's very exciting for us too. I mean, that's really the way to do it. I think so. So if you had any advice to people out there who are watching or who will watch this, who want to get involved or want to figure out how to sort of take power back, I mean, obviously that's a start. So
I would ask people to go check out publicpower.nyc. It is a plan to take over Con Edison and other public utilities, and how we can get there. And I would also encourage people to, look at progressive organizing groups like the local DSA chapters in New York City, as well as the Working Families Party and ally groups like Make the Road and other groups that are in this fight to tax the rich. The one good thing about the tax rich campaign is that, the progressives and the lefts, and the liberal types, it's a wide range. But through it all, we all kind of came together, and are supporting the similar policies and tax bills. So it's good to see how one by one, after many, many meetings and organizing, we're there. So I look forward to next year when we have a new body of lawmakers that are coming into Albany. For this year, the chips are against us, especially when the governor keeps moving the goalpost, because originally he was saying, oh, yeah, we're going to tax the rich, we have to do it. And now he's saying we're not going to get to it till March or April. He keeps moving it. So unless something drastic happens in the next couple of weeks, I don't see us getting into a significant number. But you can help by just calling governor, tweeting at him, doing whatever you can to hold him accountable for the next couple of weeks.
So, somebody writes, I want Assemblyman Kim to fight Governor Cuomo for charity. Lots and lots of charity. You don't have to respond to that. We know you'd kick his ass. But Assemblyman, I want to thank you for joining us and taking the time out of the fight to come on and talk about this. And we hope to have you on again under better circumstances.
Thank you.
Or at least if things get more fucked up, we'll talk about it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Assemblyman Kim.
Thank you, Walker. Thank you, Mark. All right. Have a good night, guys.
And thank you everybody for watching.
Bye.
That was fun.
That was good.
All right, everybody. We're gonna end this stream. Thanks for watching. Thank you for commenting. Stay, and stick. Keep an eye on
tweeting.
Yeah.
Tweet at Cuomo.
Yeah, tweet at Cuomo.
10 times a day.
We'll do more of these. They seem to be fun for hopefully everybody. And yeah, we have fun. We have a good time. Mark,
Absolutely.
get cozy.
Yeah, I'm gonna go check out the snow accumulation.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so jealous. All right.